Let's face it, we all long for joy. We want to experience joy in our daily lives, with our families, in all of our relationships and pursuits. We invest considerable amount of time, energy, and money in obtaining joy. Yet our search can be likened to Waylon Jennings' song, Looking for Love, where he describes his misdirected search for love. In the following lines, he identifies it, and he says, I was looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. So it is in our misdirected search for joy. But the Apostle Paul knew and understood the source of joy, how it's developed in and through our lives. And he explains that throughout the book of Philippians. John MacArthur, in his commentary on the book of Philippians, presents a number of truths about joy that Paul also articulates in his book. The first one is recognizing that joy is a gift from God. Now, it stems from a relationship with God. We get into trouble when we look for joy through circumstances and through people. It doesn't come to us when we have favorable circumstances or circumstances that end with a desirable outcome. It's not achieved through the goals and earthly dreams that we have, their fulfillment, because quite often God shatters our earthly dreams and goals in order to establish His greater dreams and goals for our lives. Job, Naomi, Ruth, Joseph all had this experience, but in and through their experiences, they established a deepened relationship with God. A second truth is that joy is a gift that comes to those who receive the Lordship of Jesus Christ into their lives. Jesus was a model of absolute surrender to God through His daily life and all the way to Calvary. It was His death that opened up an avenue to our developing a relationship with God. He removed sin, which was our blockage in entering into a relationship with God. Now, even so, as Christ was surrendered to God's Lordship, we need to surrender to Christ's Lordship. That will help maintain our fellowship with God and prevent competitors of joy or competitors that would prevent the Lordship of God to rule in our lives. This became a reality to me as 2 years ago I traveled out of state to a Christian Writers Conference. My intention was to pitch my Philippians study guide to a publisher. And I had targeted a particular company. I knew they would be at the conference. I hired an editor to look at my work, and I rewrote the entire study guide of Philippians to match this publisher's format. Well, it wasn't long after my arrival at the conference that I came to recognize that the publishing company's representative was not going to be there. Apparently some sickness was keeping that individual from being at the conference. This discovery was very disturbing, not to mention painful, and I remember facing the reality of this while in my room. And I just remember really falling on my knees and just beginning to pray. And I shared with God that I couldn't understand why this had happened. I had invested $1,000 to $1,500 in getting there, and the practice of the pitch and the plans were all really shattered and were not to happen. And at that point, I looked down at my study guide and I read the front title, which was Embracing Joy, Whatever Your Circumstance. And at that point, I realized, first of all, that God was asking me to live what I had written, and that, yes, indeed, my plans for what I desired to happen at that conference were shattered and were not to happen, but that God had brought me there and that He had plans that were different than mine. And it was critical that I seek to find out what His plans are, to surrender to them and have His will accomplished while I was at that conference. It's interesting. After that evening, kneeling there on the floor of my room, I had headed out the next day, and there were a number of women that I had chatted with that were facing similar challenges and discouragement. And I remember sharing my story with them, praying with them, and they had thanked me for the encouraging words and redirecting their focus onto what God's purpose was for them to be there. Now, because I had been able to connect with God and seek to find out what His plans were and to surrender to those, I was able to encourage those other women. Joy is most fully experienced when we obey God's word. Now, in order to obey, to be obedient, we need to have a relationship with God based upon love and trust. We do not obey those that we do not love or trust. We may comply with people, but that's typically just to avoid the outcome and the consequences. But obedience is based upon those who love and trust God. Now, in order to love and trust God, we need to know Him. And the central way that God speaks to us is through His Word. That's where we discover who God is, His character, His plans for our life, the depth of His love for us. So obedience will happen as we deepen our understanding of God through the study of His Word. Obedience is costly. It cost Christ His death on Calvary. Obedience to missionaries has cost them separation from family and friends. When you look at Moses and his life, his obedience put him smack dab in front of Pharaoh, asking that the Israelites be released. The Israelites, as a result, experienced Pharaoh's wrath in that they were beaten and whipped. Their burdens and their expectations as slaves were increased. And then the Israelites certainly complained against Moses, telling him that he has made them to be a stench before Pharaoh. So the cost of his obedience, it was very uncomfortable, yet it was right. It is our obedience to God and His Word that really frees us. It frees us from other things that would seek to establish lordship in our life, our desires, our wishes, other people, things. We are only free when we are in obedience to God, and that is when we most fully experience joy. And in review, remember, joy is a gift from God that comes through a relationship with Him. Joy is a gift to those who establish the lordship of Jesus Christ in their lives. And joy is most fully experienced to those who obey God's word. Blessings to you.